Welcome to Dat Better, the show where we talk about the organizational and software engineering challenges that we have experienced as a software engineering consulting firm. Today, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. Generative AI tools such as ChatGPT and Google Bard have lately provoked a lot of hype and hyperventilation. AI is going to solve all our problems, take all our jobs, make everyone rich, and wipe out humanity. I'm not definitively ruling out the Skynet scenario, but at least for now, the truth is more mundane. As engineers, we're interested in AI's current capabilities and future potential. We're also very much aware of its limitations, as well as the risks of using it irresponsibly. If you treat AI like a magic box from which you can pull all your code, you'll end up with horrible, vulnerable, no good, and probably very bad software. This is why you don't have to worry about AI taking your job. AI isn't magic, but it is a very useful tool that smart developers can use to responsibly augment and accelerate their abilities to solve big problems. AI is going to free us from many repetitive tasks, speed up prototyping, and help us more fully implement the principles of test-driven development. But our critical thinking skills, values, and human understanding will be more important than ever. At 7Factor, all of our engineers have GitHub Copilot subscriptions, and we're experimenting carefully about how we can use AI to conscientiously craft more secure, highly available, and valuable solutions for our clients. Along the way, we're learning how to get the most out of what AI does well and how to integrate that with what human engineers do best. So, prepare to take a Turing test and CAPTCHA all the squares with flags. Let's talk about how developers should use AI. All right, today I have with me Zach Breckbull. He's a software engineer with us. Zach, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Zach Breckbull. I have been in the software industry for 12, 13 years now. Mm-hmm.
Self-taught, by the way.
Self-taught.
Which is amazing.
Have not done anything college-related or anything like that towards programming. I taught myself when I was 12, 13 years old, and have been going on since then. So, yeah, it's great to be here.
We're going to be talking about machine learning today. It's an incredibly controversial topic. Excited to dig into it. Opinions are my own for the most part. There's perhaps a few things in here that we're going to get into that are a little bit controversial, but excited to talk about it today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and how it is impacting a software engineer's job. People have probably seen the machinations on the internet of it's going to take our jobs, and it's this revolutionary technology that's going to cause software engineers to basically just be operators, where you sit in front of your keyboard and you just kind of type things and stuff comes out, or you ask the machine. You and I both know that's not true. Right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
What we think artificial intelligence is going to revolutionize is quality. At least that's what I would like to see it revolutionize. Instead of clicking a button and getting your prototype out the other side and having garbage code that you then have to deal with from a maintenance perspective, we want to think about ways that AI can augment our engineers. I like to say that artificial intelligence isn't going to replace good software engineers. A good software engineer using artificial intelligence is going to replace software engineers. So what's your take? You've been on the ground for a minute using these tools. What's your take on the current iteration of how AI has augmented your day-to-day?
Sure. Yeah, I would say for the most part, anything code-related that I write basically goes through a GitHub Copilot process at this point.
Yeah.
Just because it's auto-suggesting all the time. Hey, here's something that you could do. Here's a different thing. Here's a small block of code. I think though that it does make it really easy to use. It makes it easy to write code. But there are definitely a couple of issues there. Some of those issues being a lot of times the code snippets are not correct. I mean, the code snippets themselves are a lot of times out of context. It really just depends on how you are using it yourself. But yeah, overall the general use of a day-to-day, it does help.
I think we'll flash this up on the screen, code snippet from a LinkedIn post that I posted where one of our developers, Maharshi, had asked Copilot to create sort of a class from scratch, and it ended up doing some pretty wonky stuff. And basically created, in my opinion, what would be a maintenance nightmare for any software engineer that was going to take that code and then do something with it. The counter argument to that is that, well, you'll never read code again. But you and I both know that's not true. Right?
No, that's not true at all.
So
I reread code every day.
Yeah, give me some examples of what you've seen ChatGPT/Copilot do that's just a little wonky.
Yeah, I've asked it to generate just like, hey, I want to read this file or whatnot. And a lot of times it adds in a bunch of stuff like permissions related things or stuff that I don't want it to mess with at all. There's also stuff about web servers where it'll automatically inject different host names or ports that I'm not even using. It's not aware of the context of what exactly I'm trying to do all the time.
Right.
Sometimes it nails it. Sometimes it's like, wow, that's really good. But a lot of times it definitely does not fulfill what I'm looking for it to do.
The counter argument there is, well, you should just give it more context. Right? But I think in a greenfield situation where you're developing an application from scratch, from the ground up, there's not really a good way to provide context to the machine, right? So this is why my general thought is that we should focus on employing AI to augment things like test-driven development, like automated unit testing. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, we're using ChatGPT to generate tests after the fact. And I think that is just going to continue to perpetuate a lot of really bad practices. Yeah. Because if you're a fan of TDD, if you're not a fan of TDD, why are you watching the show? If you're a fan of TDD, then you understand that the entire point of test driving a feature is to build out the context around what that feature is doing and to build a test that is designed to test the actual behavior of the feature itself instead of just writing tests to hit a couple of edge cases and to ensure you have the appropriate branch coverage, right? Yeah. So from my perspective, the best thing to do with AI right now is to lean into the idea of getting it to test things for us and having it build out the appropriate, or having us as engineers build out the right context and then employ the machine to then write the stubbing or the scaffolding for what you're doing. How have you used AI for testing? How have you seen it work in that scenario?
So, I mean, like you had mentioned, I've seen it used a lot of times to generate tests after the fact. I don't think that's a good use of it, but it does, in a sense, if you're going to do that, then it makes it just easier. It's kind of like copy paste, but it does go a little more into context than just copy pasting and have to change a bunch of things. Another way is using it to scaffold your tests. So you can write some generic code with generic functions like you were going to do a test, and then you can ask it, hey, write me a test that verifies this. And using your scaffolding, it can kind of automate pretty decently those parts. I don't think that the code should be a production-ready type of thing. I don't think that it is necessarily production-ready from just, here's something that the AI generated.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put this in my code. But for tests, it's fantastic. It makes everything so much easier.
Right. And documentation is another thing I've seen people get really excited about, having the machine generate documentation that is readable from a target function. I think that's huge. Large language models, the strength of these things is, remember, all they're doing is guessing the next word in a sentence, right? Or guessing the next word in some code. And I think having them generate documentation from existing functions is a great idea, because I hate writing documentation. I hate writing Java doc back in the day when I was still writing code. I spent hours ensuring that my Java doc was meticulously crafted such that it generated this gorgeous HTML page, which is a thing that Java did, and that was cool and wonderful, but nobody read it, right? So I think having the machine create that is another big piece of an automation lift that our teams can get, so that you're less worried about the Swagger docs. You're less worried about, making sure that you have all of the inputs and outputs in your Swagger documentation, when you can say, hey, ChatGPT, here's a function, go figure out how to document it. It's still not going to be perfect, because it's not going to know precisely what that function does, but it's going to be able to generate the baseline set of ideas that you can then turn into better documentation and living documentation, which is very, very important in software engineering.
Absolutely.
All right. So why does AI not generate appropriate responses when you don't have context?
So the AI itself, when it's generating this code,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it's missing the context because it is just a guess. It ultimately
Right.
is using past training data
Right.
from other people writing code. I mean, even today, it's still using data from us as we write code.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, it is using that data to somehow come up with more code in the future. So these things are based on other people's contexts. So a lot of times, if you have a really good developer, that's fantastic code that gets generated from it because it's getting like the best of the best. If you also have somebody who's brand new writing code and they're using it, it's also getting their stuff as well. So ultimately, you're kind of getting a mixed bag of results, and some of that training data just can get not so good.
It doesn't have a sense of style, you know. And I hate to kind of break it down into being suave, like we're all developers, like we're just totally, you know, super suave, and you know, we're all stylistic. But honestly, if you've worked with a good engineer, you've seen that people have specific opinions on how things should go, right? And by pulling in something like artificial intelligence, you're kind of setting a baseline requirement that every piece of code has to look a certain way based on the amalgamation of every person who this thing is trained on. Yeah. That could be scary at times because there's some people and some code that I've inherited where I'm like, I don't want my AI to be replicating bad patterns. But at the same time, there's also, as you said, other really, really solid folks and solid examples that we can go by. So the argument there is, well, we should only train it on good code. Well, what's the definition of good code?
That's a great question.
That's something we've argued over for literally 20 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I have had so many conversations with other human beings on what good code is, and we never truly agree. The super engineers, I like to think of software engineering as a continuum. You've got your hackers over here and like your super engineers over here. Your super engineers are very much into patterns. They've read the Gang of Four book, and they know what a builder pattern is, and they know what a specification pattern is, and they're like, oh, patterns are life, and you should always use patterns to solve problems. And then you've got the hackers who are like, well, dude, I just want to make it work. Like, I don't care what the code looks like. That's not my problem. I'll deal with future me has to deal with that. And you're not investing in future you if you're all the way over here to the right, but you're also not actually getting things done if you're all the way over here to the left. I believe it's in the middle, right? With most things in life. Everything is a gray area somewhere in the middle. So the argument is, how do we train these things efficiently so that it does a good job at replicating the style that we care about? Now, maybe enterprises are setting up style guides, and they're saying, which we already try to do and we kind of suck at, but it's like maybe we have a baseline set of styles that we require the AI to train on. And then the other Pandora's box that we can talk about in a minute is that when you're training your and this is a huge issue in the images and in the media field, if I'm training my AI on every piece of code that exists in an open source repository, what are the ramifications of that? What if that thing replicates something that has some form of copyleft license in it, and now all of a sudden my proprietary software that I don't want open has to be opened because the machine injected a piece of code that is under copyleft license. Like, these are very hard problems that nobody has solved and nobody's talking about right now. And that kind of takes us to the next conversation about risk, right? So I told ChatGPT, or I asked it, to build a function, a stir copy function. When I was at Georgia Tech and Bill Leahy's CS course, Bill, amazing guy, they asked us to rewrite stir copy, all the string functions in C. And it was great because it helped me learn how memory allocation worked, right, on the machine itself. We don't care about that these days because there's so many VMs and Golangs running a VM. Everybody's running a VM, right? So everything's memory safe and everything's like awesome. And I've come from the dinosaur age where I had to write C code. So the issue is I asked ChatGPT to develop a stir copy function for me, and it did it. But it was vulnerable to a buffer overflow attack. Even a rudimentary C programmer would look at this and say, no, we're not going to do that. Now, granted, I then asked it, I said, hey, can you please, I said, this thing is vulnerable to a buffer overflow attack. Can you please fix it? And it said, sure. And then it went and fixed it. But why didn't it develop the first time the best solution, right? So let's talk about risks. What are some risks that you've seen from utilizing these large language models to help augment your code?
Well, first of all, like I said before, when you get some developers that are kind of getting new into the industry and they're copy pasting a lot of these things, a lot of times you'll get older code, and a lot of that code is vulnerable. And so what happens when that gets into the training data, you get vulnerable code. So a lot of times there's things left in there for web servers, for just being able to arbitrarily read files or buffer overflows, any kind of, just a whole bunch of different plethora of things. Thankfully, I haven't personally encountered a ton of that, at least, or in a sense, haven't gone into that. But thankfully,
right. And I think,
but it's because I've been in the industry for so long.
Right.
I kind of see those things right away.
Exactly.
And so I wouldn't even let that get into the code.
Exactly. The more time you spend doing this, the less likely you are to be vulnerable to copy pasta-ish nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, even junior engineers, when they come and join us, the first thing we tell them is, please don't just Google a problem and go to Stack Overflow and copy and paste the first solution you have, because maybe it's right, maybe it's not. It really depends on the context of the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think that we're going to build a generation through these tools, if we're not careful, of software developers that don't understand style, that don't understand what good code looks like. Again, the argument being that we'll never write code again. You'll just use low code in a trench coat, which is basically what AI is in certain ways, right? You'll talk to the machine and it will develop code that you can then use. Now, I have to say, like, the coolest thing on the planet is that I can boot up ChatGPT and write a sentence in plain English and it does a thing. That's like Star Trek computer style cool stuff. You know what I mean? I remember back in my HCI courses at Georgia Tech, we talked about how command line interfaces are the very worst, because you have to memorize all of the context around everything that a particular command line interface
so
does.
Many flags.
Flags. You know, anybody that's tried to unzip a tar, like, I remember what I had to Google this 1,000 times.
XZVF.
See, you remembered it and I didn't. I literally was going to say I don't even know what it is right now. But like, if you're a Linux sysadmin and you've done it 1,000 times, maybe you still even forget like how to do a sed or into an awk, into a grep, into all this crazy stuff that I learned in school. But ChatGPT has revolutionized that, because now I can just say, hey, ChatGPT, splice this sentence on this and replace all this with that, or generate the sed expression that does this, and I can talk to it like it's a computer, or talk to it like it's a human. That is a massive shift, a paradigm shift in how we as human beings can interact with computers.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing, but it's dangerous because it means that people will stop trying to understand what's inside the box and just use the box.
It's a more dangerous version of copy-paste.
It is a 5,000 times more dangerous version of copy-paste. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't use these tools.
Yeah.
You know, I honestly believe that this is a revolutionary thing for automation. It's a revolutionary thing for testing. I would love to see ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot applied more to the testing space, because I think there's so much value it can add there. But I'm scared that it's going to trigger this revolution of garbage into our industry that now we have to maintain somehow. And again, maybe the machine maintains it for us. I don't know. I could be wrong, right? And 5 years, I'm going to look back on this YouTube video and be like, oh my God, what an idiot. Or I'm going to be like, you know what? I was onto something there, because it's being a developer isn't as simple as pushing a button and having code generation produce a product for you. We've had code generation for years.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about what C++ templating is, it's code generation.
True.
Right? We've built this, we've done this for many, many years. So developers are the best people to provide a commentary on a glorified code generator, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we let's talk a little bit about how we use it. We've kind of waxed poetic over doom and gloom and doomsday scenarios, but let's talk about how we use it, because we really do believe in this technology. We think it's awesome.
Yeah. So I know that, so just in my personal stuff, I have worked a lot with Rust at our company, and it really does help write Rust code, surprisingly. I've only been doing Rust stuff for around 2 years now, so I'm still new into it, but I've picked it all up. I can write some pretty decent stuff, but it's nice because it just automates the ability to, like, okay, I want to write a function that reads a file. Instead of having to go and do a Google search and attempt to copy paste, I can write a comment and say, hey, please read this file for me, and it does it, and that's exactly what I want it to do. So it allows me to write a function in a fraction of the time. And again, since someone who's been in the industry for a long time, I can at least pick up on certain contextual clues about what's right, what's wrong, like should the code look like this? Should it look like that? So for someone like me, it really does make my day-to-day productivity a lot higher because I'm able to write stuff way faster and not have to worry about doing all of the boilerplate, small tasks type of deal. I can just write exactly what I want. It picks up what I'm trying to say and a couple of edits here and there, but for the most part.
For sure. And another good one is I've asked it to write a Python function that reads a CSV file. And that's great because if you've ever done that, it just takes so long to list out all the things and list out all the column names and da-da-da-da, as opposed to do this thing that I've done 1,000 times that I know how to do that, still requires some boilerplate because the idioms in a lot of these languages require just some verbosity, right? If you've ever written Java, it's extraordinarily object-oriented, as it should be. And it requires you to do a lot of, int this, var that, blah, 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 blah. But you still have to build this giant stack of objects to go and perform some form of action, assuming, again, you're doing true object-oriented programming. And, any type of boilerplate that requires, due to the way the language is designed, extra lines of code that are just there to do a thing. ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot are amazing at solving those problems for you. And you can interact with them, again, as if they were a human being and ask it, please go do this thing for me. And there it is. That's amazing. But, again, there is the challenge of ensuring that it's doing it correctly, which I think is why, again, our developers are trained to use AI, trained to use GitHub Copilot, but there's still that requirement that we look at what it generates, right? Yep. Nobody in my company is allowed to just ship a commit that is clearly generated by code because at this point we can even see it. You can tell.
I'll reject it so fast.
It's like it's obvious that came from ChatGPT because the following reasons. Because why? It's guessing the next word. It's not magic. Yeah. People treat it like magic the way the iPhone came out. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And it was an amazing product and revolutionary. But I was working with the multi-touch drivers before the iPhone existed, right? When I was at Georgia Tech. And I remember, booting up our first proof of concept with this particular driver and going, wow, this is going to be amazing. Yeah. This is going to be some really, really cool research that we're going to turn into some amazing stuff. And it took, again, Apple doubling down on that to produce something that utilized it that everybody wanted to use because multi-touch has been around for a very long time, actually. Oh, yeah. But I think we're in the same stage of our ChatGPT, of our artificial intelligence journey, right? I've taken AI. You know what AI is. We know it's just statistics, right? Yeah. Neural networks are not alive. I'm sorry. Fight me on it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Doesn't have feelings.
Again, in 5 years, if Skynet has taken over, whatever, I'm wrong, but who cares? We're all dead anyway. But it's not alive. It doesn't have feelings. It is hidden Markov models and crazy weird math in the background, creating a black box that can guess really, really well. That's where we're at right now in our evolutionary journey of artificial intelligence. And I think if we treat it that way and we treat it as the tool it is, our industry is going to get better and not worse. So speaking of Skynet, in the next 5 years, where do you think this thing is going to go, and where would you like for it to go?
That's a great question. I would love to see it generate better code in general, have more contextual clues, be able to generate larger amounts of code. I would hope that it doesn't get to the Skynet level. That
maybe,
maybe it will. I don't know, but for sure, as a developer, I think that would be the most useful thing, and that's where I would like to see it go, is just to make my job easier so I don't have to do all of the small boilerplate stuff it does today. That helps a lot. However, to be able to do more of that and have just those better contextual clues, that would be fantastic. I would appreciate that.
I think so too. And again, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a machine learning expert. Let me be very clear. Disclaimer. I took some classes with Charles Isbell, who is a genius. Georgia Tech, he's the dean of college computing right now. He was my machine learning teacher, so I do know a thing or two. I clearly am not an expert, but I have implemented several machine learning algorithms in my career. And maybe I'm wrong on all of this. And again, if I am, whatever, who cares? We're dead anyway. But it's still, I think there's so much untapped potential, and we need to stop the memery on artificial intelligence. This is kind of my call to all the engineers watching this. Stop the meming, because it's a very, very important tool that we should take incredibly seriously. but we also need to put a lot of ethical procedures around it. There is the issue with copyright. There is so many policy issues, and this is why people like Elon Musk and other giant technology people, love him or hate him, I think he's right on this, that we should kind of chill out for a minute. I don't think we should stop because, again, I don't think it's Skynet, but I think we should really take a long, hard look on how this technology impacts society from a copyright perspective, from a code ownership perspective, from an intellectual property perspective. Our intellectual property laws were not designed to handle an entity that can copycat Snoop Dogg in 20 seconds, right? I asked, this is silly, I asked ChatGPT to write an out-of-office message for me in the style of Snoop Dogg, and it was absolutely glorious. I freaking loved it. I didn't put it up because I was afraid people would get mad at me, but it was so good at doing that. And again, it's because it's guessing, and it's got all of the lyrics of every single Snoop Dogg song in its brain, and it can generate, again, guess with 99% confidence this is probably something that Snoop Dogg would say as it's generating this out-of-office email. But there's so many things that society has to catch up on, I think, before we can truly utilize the potential of this particular thing. But we're going to continue leaning into it because, again, it's a super cool technology. It's something that will accelerate our engineering teams. And when used properly, it will produce amazing things for society.
Absolutely.